regards to wudu, we find him saying that when a person makes wudu properly, he does a complete wudu, washing his limbs properly, and doing so sincerely, that with every drop of water which falls from his face, the sins of his face fall away. And with every drop of water which falls from his limbs, his arms and his feet, then the sins of his arms and his feet drop away. And of course, sins are not considered to be things physical, that they could be contained in water and fall away from our bodies, like dirt would when we bathe. But the Prophet, may God's peace and blessing be upon him, he said that they do. And this is because of the fact that wudu, when done properly, purifies us spiritually. There is a cleaning external, but the internal cleaning is of even greater importance. Because we are about to engage in an act of worship. Or we could say another act of worship, because wudu itself is an act of worship too. But in the major act, the formal prayer or an informal prayer, which takes a fixed form, this prayer has to be preceded, for it to be valid, it has to be preceded by wudu. So, the point here is that the wudu, when done properly, with the Bismillah before, keeping its spiritual quality or spiritual aspect preserved, then the consequence is that the person now who embarks on the act of formal prayer, that person will better be able to give the prayer its full due. Where we have just washed ourselves, quickly rushing to the mosque, we just throw water on ourselves, we're not even really conscious of what's happening here, and we just run into the masjid, we stand up and we start to pray. Our minds still in work, still at the job, still at home or whatever, with our kids. We're standing there going through the movements, but spiritually we're not there. And of course, the reward for prayer is based on the spiritual consciousness that we put in that prayer. If it's missing, then we've just gone through a physical act, which could just as well have been aerobics or anything else. That's why also, not only did the Prophet give us guidance, spiritual guidance at the beginning of the wudu, we say Bismillah, but at the end of wudu itself, he added also that we use the name of Allah, Ya Allah, in Allahumma. We find that there also. We find that the Prophet ﷺ had said that when we complete wudu, if we say Allahumma ja'alni min at-tawwabin wa ja'alni min al-mutatahhirin, O Allah, make me of those who frequently turn to you in repentance, and of those who frequently make ourselves clean, purify ourselves. That again, the spiritual element is focused on here. After we've completed wudu, we began in the name of Allah. We've done this physical act, which is supposed to be removing sins from our limbs. And we close that act with calling on Allah, O Allah, make us, after this act, make us, as a result of this act, of those who turn to you regularly in repentance from sin, and of those who seek to purify themselves regularly. So, what else? What else do we need to understand the real status the real place of wudu in our day-to-day lives. This is why we're encouraged to stay in a state of wudu. Whenever we use the bathroom, make wudu. To regularly make wudu. Even after you have wudu, the time for prayer comes, make wudu again. It's good. If we're doing it from that spiritual perspective, then it is all good for us. And it helps us in a way that perhaps a person who is not involved, who is not spiritually attuned, would not be able to see. Because the physical element is what is most obvious. The spiritual requires a spiritual search, a spiritual effort to bring out its reality. Also, after making wudu, then the next thing before us is the prayer itself. And we find actually that the Prophet, in the beginning of his prayers, though the prayer starts basically with the Fatiha, we find, which is the first chapter of the Quran, we find that he would make an introductory prayer. And he made a number of different versions. There are a number of different ones which he did. Anyway, one of them, which one of the companions had asked about for the Prophet ﷺ to tell him, and that was Abu Huraira. He asked the Prophet ﷺ, what is it that you're saying, before you start the recitation of the Fatiha, the first chapter of the Quran? Because he noted that he would pause, and he seemed to say something to himself. So he asked him, and he told him, he said, what I say is Allahumma ba'id bayni wa bayna khatayaya. And it's a fairly long dua. But basically, again, we're starting off with Allahumma. O Allah, ba'id bayni wa bayna khatayaya. Put distance between me and my sins. And the dua goes on to say, put a distance which is like the distance between the east and the west. And clean me from my sins the way you clean, or the way a white garment is cleaned from dirt. This is the basic dua which he gave, which begins the prayer. And there are other versions. Anyway, we're closing this session now. Our time has come. Leaving you with the thought of remembering to say Bismillah before wudu. This is one in particular that most Muslims don't observe. Most are not even aware that it was an instruction. Strive to put this back into our daily routine. Routine which should help us to grow spiritually, to come closer to God, to become better human beings who are more beneficial not only to ourselves but to our families and the societies around us. With that, dear viewers, I'd like to thank you for being with us in this segment of our program, In the Names of Allah. And we hope to see you in our future episodes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
When you are weak and the road seems long, remember, just remember, seek strength from the strong. When life